My HOA thought they could bully me into taking down my flag with a $1,000 fine. But what started as one woman's fight turned into a neighborhood-wide rebellion, and the ending will shock you. I still remember the exact moment it all started. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops, the birds were chirping, and I was sipping on my first cup of coffee on the porch. My American flag swayed gently in the breeze, catching the light in a way that always made me smile. That flag wasn't just fabric on a pole, it was a piece of my family's story. My father had been a veteran, my brother too, and every time I looked at it, I felt a surge of pride. That's why I nearly spit out my coffee when I noticed a crisp white envelope taped to my front door. At first I thought it might be a flyer or some coupon mailer, but as I pulled it down and saw the Homeowners Association letterhead, my stomach tightened. Inside was a typed letter, written in that cold, formal tone that HOAs love to use. This is a violation notice. Your property is in violation of HOA Regulation 14B, unauthorized displays. The American flag displayed on your porch is not permitted under current HOA guidelines. A fine of $1,000 will be imposed if the flag is not removed within 7 days. I read it twice, then a third time. Unauthorized display? A fine? For my flag? I couldn't believe what I was reading. My hands trembled as I held the paper. I'd heard stories about HOAs being power-hungry, but I'd always thought they were exaggerated. People love to complain, right? I figured the HOA was just there to keep the lawns tidy and stop people from parking boats in the driveway. But this was something else entirely. I walked inside and set the letter down on the kitchen counter. My husband, Daniel, looked up from his laptop. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "They're fining us." $1,000 for the flag, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took the letter, scanned it, and let out a sharp laugh. This has to be a joke. But it wasn't. As the day wore on, my shock turned into anger. I knew about the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, a federal law that protects homeowners from exactly this kind of nonsense. How could the HOA think they were above federal law? That night, as I sat staring out the window at my flag glowing softly under the porch light, I made a decision. I wasn't going to take it down. Not today, not ever. If they wanted to fight, they were going to get one. And deep down, a small part of me smiled. Because if the HOA thought I was just another passive homeowner they could bully, they had picked the wrong woman. Would you have paid the fine or fought back like me? The very next morning, I decided I wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to come knocking. If the HOA had a problem, I was going to face it head on. After all, I wasn't breaking the law. I was exercising a right. So I slipped the violation notice into my purse, straightened my blazer, and walked down the street to the small brick building where the HOA kept its office. The door chimed as I stepped inside, and I was greeted by the faint smell of air freshener and the too bright smile of Margaret, the HOA secretary. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she chirped. I laid the letter down on the counter. "I'd like to talk to whoever thought this was a good idea." Her smile faltered just a little. She glanced down at the notice, then back at me. "Oh, that would be Mr. Clarkson, the HOA president. He's in his office. Let me see if he's available." I crossed my arms, trying to calm the storm brewing in my chest. After a few moments, the door at the back opened and out walked Clarkson himself. Mid-50s, comb over, always dressed like he was auditioning for a corporate commercial. He adjusted his tie as he approached me, a smug look plastered on his face. "Ah, Mrs. Miller," he said smoothly. "I had a feeling we'd be seeing you." I raised an eyebrow. "You fined me $1,000 for flying the American flag. Of course you're seeing me." His expression didn't change. "It's nothing personal. Our community has rules about exterior displays. We don't allow flags, banners, or signs of any kind. They disrupt the uniformity of the neighborhood." "Uniformity?" I repeated, incredulous. "You do realize that what you're doing is illegal, right? There's a federal law that specifically protects homeowners' right to display the American flag." Clarkson gave a little chuckle, the kind of laugh that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Miller, federal law doesn't dictate our HOA's community standards. If you want to live here, you play by our rules." I could feel my face heating. "So your rules are more important than federal law?" His smug grin widened. "Around here, yes." That was the moment something clicked in me. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. Clarkson thrived on it. He wanted everyone in this neighborhood to bow to him like he was some kind of king. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make it sting. "You picked the wrong woman to mess with. That flag isn't coming down." His smile faltered just a bit. "Then expect the fine, and possibly further action." "Good day, Mrs. Miller." I walked out without another word, but my heart was racing. By the time I got home, I already knew what I had to do. If Clarkson wanted a fight, I'd give him one, and I wasn't planning on losing. Do you think HOAS should have this much power? After my run-in with Clarkson, I knew one thing for sure. If I tried to fight this battle completely alone, I might drown in legal fees and stress. Clarkson had the HOA board in his pocket. But what he didn't realize was that the board didn't represent all of us. They just represented themselves. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I needed to know if other people had been bullied by the HOA. Maybe I wasn't the only one. My first stop was the Hendersons, a sweet retired couple who lived 2 doors down. Mr. Henderson answered the door in his usual suspenders and ball cap. When I showed him the violation notice, his eyes widened. "They fined you for your flag," he said, shaking his head. "That's outrageous. Margaret tried to tell us last year that we couldn't have wind chimes because they made too much noise." Wind chimes. This HOA has gone power crazy. Mrs. Henderson joined him at the door, nodding vigorously. "Clarkson just wants everything his way. He even told me I couldn't plant tulips in my front yard because they clashed with the approved color palette." Hearing that lit a fire under me. It wasn't just me, they'd been tormenting others too. Next, I stopped by the Sanchez family across the street. Their teenage son played baseball, and they'd put a small "Go Tigers" banner in their yard last season. I remembered it disappearing suddenly, and now I knew why. "They fined us $300, Mrs. Sanchez said, rolling her eyes. "We took the banner down, but my husband still fumes about it. We wanted to fight, but honestly, we didn't have the energy. They count on that, you know? They push until people give up." Her words echoed in my head. They count on that. As I went door to door, I collected story after story. Flags, garden decorations, basketball hoops, even a kid's lemonade stand once. The HOA had shut it all down, backed up by Clarkson's smug grin and his constant threats of fines. By the time I got back home, I had a notebook full of notes, names, and details. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the pages. This wasn't just about my flag anymore. This was about an entire community being bullied. Daniel came in, placing a fresh cup of coffee beside me. "So, what's the verdict?" I looked up at him, determination coursing through me. "We're not alone. They've been terrorizing everyone. If we stand together, we can push back." His eyes lit with pride. "Then maybe it's time to rally the neighbors." That night, as I pinned the violation notice on our fridge like a trophy, I realized something. Clarkson had no idea what he'd started. He thought he was fighting one woman, but what he'd really done was spark a rebellion. What's the most ridiculous rule you've ever heard from an HOA? A week after my little neighborhood investigation, Clarkson struck again. I woke up one Saturday morning to find another envelope taped to my door. This one was thicker, with bold red letters stamped across the top. "Final warning." Inside was a new notice, doubling down on the original fine. The letter claimed that since I had failed to comply with their request, the fine was now officially assessed at $1,000 and would continue to accrue interest until paid. On top of that, they threatened legal action if the flag wasn't removed immediately. I slammed the paper on the counter and groaned. "They're not backing off, Daniel. They're doubling down." He read the notice, his jaw tightening. "They're trying to scare you. But this just means you've got them rattled." Still, I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach. The HOA wasn't just some cranky neighbor. They had money, lawyers, and the power to make my life miserable, but I also knew I had something stronger: the law, and now, the neighborhood behind me. That evening, I hosted a small gathering in my backyard. I invited the Hendersons, the Sanchezes, the Robinsons, and a few others who had shared their HOA horror stories with me. We set out lemonade and cookies, and under the soft glow of string lights, I laid everything on the table. "They're fining me $1,000 for flying the flag," I said, holding up the notice. "But here's the thing, they can't do that. Federal law protects our right to display the American flag. Clarkson is counting on us being too tired or too scared to fight back, but if we push back together, we can stop him." The Hendersons nodded immediately. Mrs. Robinson raised her hand. "So what do you suggest?" "A petition." "That's part of it," I said. "But I'm also considering legal action. If they want to play court games, I'm willing to meet them there, but I need to know if others are willing to stand up too." For a moment, there was silence. Then Mr. Henderson slammed his hand on the table. "Count me in. Enough is enough." One by one, the others agreed. Some were hesitant, but the frustration in their voices was undeniable. The HOA had pushed too far for too long. Just as I was feeling a surge of hope, a shadow fell across the fence. Clarkson himself stood there, arms crossed, smirk firmly in place. "Lovely little gathering," he said smoothly. "But I'd be careful. Encouraging others to defy the HOA could be seen as inciting non-compliance. That comes with consequences." The neighbors stiffened, but I stepped forward. "You're trespassing, Clarkson. Get off my property." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. "This is your last chance, Mrs. Miller. Take down the flag, or we'll make you regret it." I felt the fury rise in my chest, but I forced a calm smile. "See you in court." Clarkson's smirk finally slipped. He turned on his heel and walked away. But as I watched him go, I knew this battle was about to get ugly. Would you have asked neighbors for support or handled it alone? The morning after Clarkson's little intimidation stunt, I knew I had to get serious. My neighbors' support was a huge boost, but Clarkson wasn't going to be swayed by community pressure alone. He had the HOA's bank account behind him, and he was already threatening court. If I didn't get ahead of this, I could end up buried in paperwork, fines, and stress. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I called a lawyer. After some searching, I found a local firm that specialized in property and HOA disputes. The receptionist booked me an appointment with Sarah Dalton, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for dismantling overreaching HOAs. The moment I stepped into her office, I felt like I'd walked into a fortress. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with legal volumes, framed degrees on the wall, and Sarah herself, sharp suit, sharper eyes, waiting behind a polished mahogany desk. "Mrs. Miller," she said, extending her hand, "tell me what happened." I handed her both violation notices. As she read them, her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, and finally to a smirk that mirrored my own. "They're trying to fine you for flying the American flag," she said, tapping the page. "This is a textbook violation of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. It doesn't matter what Clarkson thinks his rules are. The law is on your side." Relief flooded through me. "So, I'm not crazy? I'm not just being stubborn?" "Not at all," Sarah said firmly. "You're standing on solid ground. Here's what I recommend. You don't pay a dime, you don't take the flag down, and you let me send them a formal letter citing federal law. If they still want to take you to court after that, well, let's just say I'd be happy to make an example out of them." I couldn't help but grin. "How much will this cost me?" Sarah leaned back. "Not nearly as much as it's going to cost them if they push this any further." Walking out of her office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I had the law on my side, a lawyer in my corner, and neighbors ready to back me up. Clarkson wasn't going to steamroll me, not this time. That evening, Sarah's letter was hand-delivered to the HOA office. It was short, direct, and devastating. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, 2005, prohibits any HOA from restricting homeowners from displaying the U.S. flag on their property. Any further attempt to fine or harass my client will be met with immediate legal action. When Daniel read it, he chuckled. That should shut him up. But it didn't. 2 days later, another letter arrived. Not from Clarkson this time, but from the HOA's own lawyer. It stated they intended to proceed with legal remedies if I didn't remove the flag immediately. I folded the letter slowly, my jaw set. "So it's war," I whispered. "At this point, would you hire a lawyer or wait it out?" The letter from the HOA's lawyer sat on my dining table like a grenade waiting to go off. Clarkson wasn't backing down. If anything, he was doubling down. I called Sarah the next morning. She wasn't surprised. Typical HOA move, she said coolly. They think if they scare you with legal jargon, you'll fold. But this is good. If they want to drag this into court, we'll take it there. And I promise you they won't like how it ends. Still, I couldn't shake the weight pressing down on me. Court wasn't just a fight, it was public. If I lost, it would set an example that Clarkson could use to silence everyone else. But if I won, we'd set a different kind of precedent. That evening, Daniel and I hosted a gathering in our backyard. We invited every neighbor who'd ever felt the sting of Clarkson's HOA. Folding chairs circled around the fire pit, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, people trickled in carrying dishes, drinks, and stories. The Hendersons were first, bringing a plate of homemade cookies. Then came the Sanchezes, the Millers from down the street, and even the Patel family who rarely joined neighborhood events but said they wanted to support me. By the time the fire was crackling, a dozen households were represented. I stood up, holding the violation letter in one hand. "They're taking me to court over my flag," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "They're not just coming after me, they're coming after all of us. Every basketball hoop, every garden decoration, every choice that doesn't fit Clarkson's vision of this neighborhood. But I'm not backing down, not this time." The crowd broke into applause. I saw heads nodding, eyes shining with determination. Mr. Henderson raised his hand. "What can we do to help?" I smiled. "Be there. When we go to court, I want the judge to see exactly who this affects. Show up. Share your stories if you're willing. Let them know it's not just me, it's an entire community." People murmured in agreement. Someone shouted, "We'll be there," and others echoed the promise. Later that night, as we cleaned up paper plates and empty soda cans, Daniel wrapped his arms around me. "You've started something bigger than just a flag fight," he said softly. I leaned against him, staring at Old Glory fluttering in the evening breeze. Clarkson thought he could isolate me, corner me into submission, but instead, he'd united an entire neighborhood. The next morning, Sarah called with the court date. It was set for 3 weeks out. That gave us just enough time to prepare witness statements, evidence, and, most importantly, our courage. I looked out the window at my flag, proud and defiant. "All right," I whispered. "Let's give Clarkson the fight of his life. If you were me, would you keep the flag up or take it down temporarily?" The morning of the court date felt heavier than any storm cloud. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Clarkson's smug grin as he waved his violation notice like a victory flag. But when I pulled back the curtains, my flag was still there, catching the sunrise, red, white, and blue. It gave me the courage I needed. Daniel drove us downtown in silence, his hand never leaving mine. My stomach churned. But when we arrived at the courthouse, the sight waiting for me stopped me cold. Half the neighborhood was there. The Hendersons waved as we walked up the steps. The Sanchezes held a small homemade sign that read, "We stand with our neighbor." Even people I didn't know well, like the quiet Patel family, were there, standing tall. Clarkson, of course, was also there. He strutted up the courthouse steps in a navy suit that probably cost more than my car. His lawyer followed behind him, clutching a briefcase like it contained the Holy Grail. Clarkson spotted me and smirked. "Nice turnout," he sneered. "Too bad none of them get a say." I didn't flinch. Maybe not. But they'll sure make an impression inside. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the case. Clarkson's lawyer jumped in first, rattling off a list of supposed HOA regulations I had violated. He spoke quickly, confident, almost bored, as if he thought this case was already in the bag. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood tall, her voice crisp and commanding. She didn't just defend me, she attacked the very foundation of their argument. "Your Honor," she began, holding up the federal statute. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 clearly prohibits any HOA from restricting the display of the United States flag on a homeowner's property. My client has not violated any valid regulation. She is being harassed. And frankly, so is this entire community." The judge's brow lifted slightly. Clarkson shifted in his seat. That's when Sarah called the first witness, Mr. Henderson. He shuffled to the stand, looking every bit the kindly grandfather he was. But when he spoke, his words cut sharper than any lawyer's. "They fined my wife and me for wind chimes," he said simply. "Wind chimes. We've lived here 30 years and suddenly we're criminals because Clarkson doesn't like the sound of them? This isn't about rules. This is about control." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Next came Mrs. Sanchez. She told the story of her son's baseball banner, how it was ripped away by threats of fines. Her voice cracked when she said, "They made my son feel like he'd done something wrong just for being proud of his team." By the time she stepped down, even the judge looked uncomfortable. Clarkson's lawyer tried to object, saying these stories were irrelevant, but Sarah countered with precision. "Your Honor, this shows a clear pattern of abuse by the HOA board. This case isn't just about one flag. It's about whether an HOA can trample on the rights of every homeowner under their rule." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I felt the tide turning. Clarkson sat stiffly, his smirk long gone. For the first time, he looked nervous, and we weren't even done yet. Have you ever taken someone to court for something unfair? By the second hour of testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. What began as Clarkson's confident show of force was unraveling, thread by thread. When Sarah called me to the stand, I took a deep breath and walked forward. My palms were sweaty, but as soon as I raised my hand and swore to tell the truth, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah began, "why did you choose to fly the American flag in your yard?" I swallowed hard. "Because my father was a veteran. He fought for this country, and that flag represents him. And every sacrifice he and others made. It's not just fabric on a pole. It's pride. It's memory. It's home." I shouldn't have to defend that the courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. Sarah continued, "Did you ever attempt to comply with HOA guidelines?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I reviewed every document. Nothing prohibits flying the flag. Clarkson invented this rule to control me, and when I refused to bow, he escalated it." Clarkson's lawyer jumped up. "Objection, speculation." But Sarah was ready. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit B, Clarkson's personal email to my client. in which he states, quote, "If you don't take that flag down, I'll make sure you regret it." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Clarkson's face flushed red. His lawyer tried to object again, but the judge overruled him. "Mr. Clarkson," the judge said sternly, "is this your email?" Clarkson stammered. "Well, yes, but—" "No further questions," Sarah said smoothly, returning to her seat. The damage was done. When both sides rested, the judge called for closing arguments. Clarkson's lawyer repeated the same tired refrain about neighborhood uniformity and aesthetic standards. But it rang hollow now. Sarah's closing, however, was thunder. "Your Honor," she said, her voice rising with passion, "this case is about more than one woman and one flag. It's about whether a homeowners association can bully, harass, and threaten the very people it's supposed to serve. Congress passed the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act for precisely this reason, to prevent exactly this abuse. If this board can punish Mrs. Miller for honoring her father's service, then no homeowner in America is safe from their overreach." For a moment, the room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. The judge leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Then she spoke. "This court rules in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Ma. Miller, the fines are nullified, and the HOA is hereby ordered to cease all attempts to restrict the lawful display of the United States flag. Furthermore, given the pattern of harassment evidenced here, this court strongly recommends a review of the HOA board's conduct by the community." The gavel struck. Case closed. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Cheers erupted from my neighbors seated behind me. Daniel grabbed my hand, his smile wide with pride. "And Clarkson?" He sat frozen, his face pale as marble. His empire of control had just crumbled, in front of everyone. "Do you think the judge will side with me or the HOA?" Walking out of the courthouse felt like stepping into sunlight after a long storm. The air tasted different, lighter, freer. My neighbors gathered around me, clapping me on the back, hugging me, even tearing up. "You did it!" Mrs. Sanchez exclaimed, clutching my hand. "You didn't just win for yourself. You won for all of us." Daniel squeezed my shoulder. "No," he said proudly. "She did it." Clarkson never knew who he was messing with. The story spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood knew the outcome. Some even printed out the judge's ruling and pinned it to their mailboxes like badges of honor. For once, it wasn't Clarkson's rules taped to people's doors. It was proof that his power wasn't absolute. The backlash hit him almost immediately. At the next HOA board meeting, residents packed the clubhouse to standing room only. Clarkson tried to open the session with his usual pomp, but the crowd wasn't having it. "You wasted our money on a lawsuit you couldn't win?" Someone shouted from the back. "Yeah," another voice chimed in. "We pay dues for community maintenance, not your personal vendettas." Clarkson's jaw clenched as he tried to regain control, but the energy had shifted. People weren't afraid anymore. One by one, neighbors stood up and demanded accountability. The Hendersons proposed a motion for a special election to remove Clarkson as HOA president. The Patels seconded it. Within minutes, the room erupted with unanimous applause. Clarkson sputtered, red-faced, but it was clear he was cornered. By the following month, Clarkson was gone, voted out and replaced by a board that actually listened to residents. The first order of business? Rolling back several of the most ridiculous violations Clarkson had enforced, from wind chimes to basketball hoops. Kids set up lemonade stands without fear. Families decorated their yards with pride. And everywhere I looked, American flags waved freely. One evening, as Daniel and I sat on our porch, watching the sunset, the Hendersons strolled by. Mr. Henderson tipped his hat. "Feels like we've got our neighborhood back," he said with a smile. I nodded, looking up at my flag swaying gently in the breeze. We didn't just take it back. We proved it was always ours. The fight had started with a piece of fabric on a pole, but it had grown into something much bigger. It was about freedom, community, and the power of standing together. Clarkson had underestimated all of us, and in the end, he lost everything he tried so hard to control. If I win, should I sue them for damages too? Weeks passed, but the sense of victory never faded. The neighborhood was different now, lighter, warmer, alive again. Kids played basketball in driveways, wind chimes tinkled in the summer breeze, and laughter carried down the street where tension used to hang. Every time I looked at my flag, I felt the weight of what we'd accomplished. It wasn't just my victory, it was ours. A community that had been silenced found its voice again, and all it took was one spark to ignite it. One Saturday afternoon, we hosted a block party. Tables lined the street, covered with food, drinks, and desserts. Someone even set up a bounce house for the kids. Neighbors I barely knew before all came out, smiling, talking, sharing stories. And right at the center of it all, 3 flags waved proudly, mine, the Hendersons, and the Sanchez's. As the sun dipped low, Daniel clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. "I think we owe a toast," he said, raising his drink, "to our neighborhood, free, strong, and united. And to my wife, who taught us all that sometimes standing up for one thing means standing up for everything." The crowd erupted in cheers. My cheeks flushed, but my heart swelled. I stood up, holding my glass. "I didn't do this alone," I said, scanning the faces of my neighbors. "Each of you had the courage to speak up, to show up, to fight back. Clarkson thought one person couldn't make a difference. Well, he was wrong. We all made a difference. Together." The cheers grew louder, echoing down the street. Later that night, when the crowd thinned and lanterns glowed softly above the tables, I sat on my porch with Daniel. The stars shimmered above us and the flag swayed gently in the evening breeze. I thought of my father, the man who taught me to value freedom, who saluted that same flag every morning until his last day. I whispered into the night, "This one's for you, Dad." Daniel squeezed my hand, and I knew he understood. The battle with Clarkson had started with a $1,000 fine, but what we gained was priceless: unity, freedom, and a reminder that no bully, no matter how powerful, can silence a community that stands together. And as long as that flag waved above my porch, I'd never forget it. What lesson do you think HOAs should learn from this?